Imagine being invited to your ex's wedding just so they could disgrace you. That was Marcus's plan for his black ex-wife. He wanted her to sit there, broken, while he showed off his new life. But what he never expected was for her to arrive like a queen, rolling up in a motorcade, cameras flashing from every angle, and 3 children by her side whose very faces carried the truth he fought so hard to bury. The moment she stepped onto that red carpet, jaws dropped, whispers spread like wildfire, and in that instant, Marcus's perfect world began to crumble. Before I take you deeper into this story, I want to pause for a second and ask you something. Where are you tuning in from right now? Are you watching from Atlanta? Maybe Houston? Or out in Cali, Chicago, New York? Drop your city down in the comments. I love knowing where family is listening from. And if you've ever been underestimated, if anyone's ever tried to count you out, go ahead and hit that like button right now. Because trust me, this story, this one, is for you. Marcus always knew how to play the part. Back home in Dallas, folks called him Slick, always dressed to impress, always talking about the day he'd make it big. But the truth? When he first hit Atlanta, he didn't have a dime to his name. And if we're being real, the only reason he survived those years was because of Aaliyah. Aaliyah, a Bronx girl with grit carved into her bones. She worked 2 jobs, morning shifts at a diner and late nights cleaning offices, just so Marcus could sit in their 1-bedroom apartment and map out his dreams. She'd come home smelling like bleach and coffee, drop her purse on the counter, and still manage to ask him, "You eat yet?" And he'd smile, kiss her forehead, and say, "Not yet, I was waiting on you." But behind closed doors, she was carrying the whole weight. She kept the lights on, she paid the rent when he couldn't. When folks in the Bronx whispered, "Girl, he's just using you," she shut it down with, "That's my man, we gon' build together." And she believed that with all her heart. Even when she was bone-tired, even when her hands were raw from scrubbing floors, she held on to that dream. Then one day, Marcus started seeing the world differently. It wasn't about struggle anymore. It was about image. He got a taste of Atlanta wealth. He started hanging with men who drove Bentleys, sipping champagne in Buckhead lounges, and suddenly Aaliyah didn't fit that picture anymore. She was too raw, too real, too much a reminder of where he came from. And just like that, he walked away, left her with 3 babies and nothing but overdue bills stacked on the counter. Fast forward to this day. The Georgia sun was blazing, the roses lining the aisle were blinding white, and Marcus stood at the altar with a grin plastered across his face. His new bride, Emily, adjusted her diamond bracelet while guests fanned themselves with programs. The champagne tower sparkled in the corner, violins played soft in the background, and all eyes were on the man who thought he had finally leveled up. Marcus leaned over to one of his groomsmen, smirking. "She gone, see today," he muttered under his breath. His boy chuckled. "You really invited her? That's cold, man." Marcus adjusted his cufflinks, whispering back, "Sometimes you gotta remind folks where they belong." He glanced toward Emily, his perfect trophy bride, and whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "She'll probably come in the same tired dress she used to wear. Wait till you see it. Embarrassing just to look at." Emily smirked, tugging on her veil, and replied, "She doesn't belong in this world anyway." A couple of guests overheard, exchanged knowing looks, and chuckled into their champagne flutes. The laughter spread, low and sharp, like knives cutting through the air. But what Marcus didn't know, what nobody in that lavish garden knew, was that destiny had already pulled up to the gates. Engines were growling outside, black-tinted windows waiting to roll down, paparazzi already leaning forward with cameras cocked. Marcus thought this was his stage, his performance. But in a matter of minutes, the entire show was about to belong to her. The ceremony hadn't even started, and the whispers were already spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Guests leaned toward each other, fanning themselves under the Georgia heat. "Why did he even invite her?" one woman muttered, eyes darting toward the empty chair in the back row. Another man smirked, sipping his champagne. "He just wants her to see what she lost. Can't say I blame him." Emily's bridesmaids giggled in a tight circle, their voices sharp. "I heard she still lives in some tiny apartment. Imagine her walking in here with that mess of a life." Another added, "She won't even show. Would you?" "If I was her, I'd be too embarrassed to walk through those gates. Marcus adjusted his tie, pretending not to hear, but his grin widened. He leaned toward Emily. See, everybody knows. She's not on my level anymore. She's gonna sit there quiet, and they'll all see the difference. Emily's lips curled into a smile, soft but cruel. Just make sure she's seated far from the front. I don't want her face in any of our pictures. The crowd chuckled. To them, it was entertainment, an added spectacle to an already lavish day. But underneath the laughter, something was stirring. The air felt heavy, like the pause before a storm. And then it came, the deep growl of engines cutting through the chatter. Heads turned toward the gates. One guest frowned, leaning forward. Hold up, y'all hear that? Another whispered, sounds like more than one car. The violins in the background wavered as the sound grew louder. Not one, not two, but an entire motorcade rolling up the drive. Black SUVs lined bumper to bumper, tinted windows gleaming under the sun. The crowd straightened in their seats, murmurs rising. Who is that? A bridesmaid gasped. Is somebody famous here? A man in the back shaded his eyes. Looks like a senator's convoy, or maybe some celebrity. Even Emily turned, confused. Marcus, who did you invite? Marcus forced a laugh, tugging on his cufflinks. Relax. Probably some guest from my side. Folks like to show off. But his voice cracked just slightly, enough to betray him. The groomsman beside him raised an eyebrow. Bruh, that don't look like no regular guest. The first SUV stopped. A chauffeur in a crisp black suit stepped out, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the door. The chatter hushed. A second SUV door opened. Two bodyguards emerged, tall, serious, scanning the crowd. People shifted in their seats, tension rising like a wave. One woman in the front row whispered, "This ain't normal. Who comes to a wedding like this?" Cameras lifted, guests clutching their phones, eager to catch whatever was about to happen. Even the photographers who were supposed to be focused on the bride turned their lenses toward the driveway, flashes already going off in anticipation. Marcus clenched his jaw, trying to keep control. He muttered through his teeth, "She wouldn't, she couldn't." Emily placed her hand on his arm. "Marcus, what is this? Who are these people?" And just then, the chauffeur reached for the car handle. The entire garden seemed to hold its breath. You could hear the rustle of dresses, the faint clink of glasses, the quickened pace of whispers racing through the crowd. The door opened slow, deliberate. A red carpet had already been rolled out, the bodyguards flanking it like a royal guard. Every guest leaned forward, eyes locked on the tinted glass, waiting. Some swore they could see the shimmer of gold inside. Everyone thought it was a senator, or maybe a celebrity, but when she stepped out, the truth hit harder than anyone could have imagined. The chauffeur's hand pulled the door wide, and for a moment the sun caught the shimmer of gold. The crowd gasped in unison as Aaliyah stepped out. She wasn't the same woman Marcus had abandoned years ago. She stood tall, draped in a golden gown that glittered under the light, jewelry catching every camera flash, her head wrapped in a crown-like cloth that made her look regal. And she was smiling, calm, confident, untouchable. The whispers tore through the wedding like wildfire. "That's her? That's Aaliyah?" One guest stammered. Another covered her mouth, muttering, she looks like royalty." Marcus froze, his grin collapsed, his body stiff. For the first time that day, he had nothing to say. Emily turned to him, jaw dropped, her bouquet trembling in her hand. "Marcus, what is this?" she hissed. He swallowed hard, but no words came. His eyes locked on Aaliyah, wide and unsteady. But the shock didn't stop there. As the cameras popped and the guests craned their necks, three small figures appeared in the doorway of the SUV. One by one, they stepped onto the red carpet. Three children, dressed in matching royal suits with golden accents, each one standing proud, their smiles bright, their presence commanding. A hush fell over the crowd. The whispers turned sharp, urgent. Wait a second." A man in the back row leaned forward. "Are those his kids?" A woman near the front covered her chest, whispering, "They look just like Marcus." Another guest shook her head slowly. "Lord have mercy, he never told nobody about this?" Emily staggered back a step, eyes darting between Marcus and the children. "Marcus, tell me this isn't true," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Marcus clenched his fists, muttering through gritted teeth, "It's not what it looks like. It's not." But his own words sounded empty, swallowed by the gasps and murmurs flooding the air. Aaliyah, calm as ever, reach for the hands of her children. She walked forward with them, each step measured, steady, powerful. The cameras lit up like fireworks, paparazzi flashes bouncing off their golden accents. To the crowd, it was no longer Marcus's wedding, it was Aaliyah's entrance, her moment. Guests shifted, pointing, whispering louder. She came with a motorcade. She's glowing. Those kids, they look like heirs. The sound swelled until it felt like the entire garden was buzzing with disbelief. And through it all, Aaliyah simply smiled, her children at her side, as if she had been preparing for this exact moment. Marcus tried to stand tall, tried to hold his composure, but his eyes betrayed him. He couldn't look away from the children, their faces, their posture, their confidence. Every detail screamed the truth he had buried, the truth he had denied. He could feel the eyes of every guest stabbing into him, waiting for an explanation he didn't have. And then it happened. One of the children, bold and innocent, tugged gently at Aaliyah's hand, looked out at the crowd, and opened his mouth. What he said next silenced the entire wedding. The words fell from the child's lips, clear and innocent. "Mommy, is that the man who left us?" And just like that, the entire wedding froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Champagne glasses hovered in the air, every whisper turned into stunned silence. Marcus's face hardened as he forced out a laugh, dry and hollow. "Kids say the wildest things," he muttered, waving a hand as though brushing dust from the air. "Don't pay that no mind." But the crowd didn't buy it. Their eyes cut back and forth between Marcus and the children, their resemblance undeniable. Emily's mother was the first to break the silence. Her voice sliced through the air. "Marcus, what is this? Who are those children?" Emily herself stepped forward, bouquet trembling in her grip. "Marcus, answer her. You told me she was nothing. You told me she had nothing." Marcus adjusted his tie, sweat forming along his temple. "This isn't what y'all think. She's just here to cause a scene." He pointed at Aaliyah, desperate. "Look at her. She's trying to ruin our day." But the murmurs were already spreading, whispers leaping from row to row. "They look just like him. I swear those are his kids. Lord, he kept this a secret?" Guests began pulling out their phones, recording, snapping photos. Camera flashes lit up the garden, brighter and harsher than the wedding photographers had ever intended. What was supposed to be Marcus's perfect day was slipping out of his hands, documented in real time. Emily's father, a man of stature and wealth, stepped forward, his voice steady but dangerous. "Marcus, tell me the truth. Did you hide this from us?" The crowd leaned closer, hungry for answers. Marcus stammered, No. It ain't like that. You gotta understand." But his words crumbled against the rising noise of the guests. Aaliyah stood in the middle of it all, dignified, glowing in her golden gown. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look rattled. She simply squeezed her children's hands and kept walking, slow and steady, down the red carpet. The more calm she appeared, the more desperate Marcus became. "Stop walking," Marcus barked suddenly, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. "Stop acting like you own this place." A hush fell again. Guests turned to see how Aaliyah would respond. She tilted her head slightly, her smile soft, and said only, "I don't need to own anything, Marcus. I built what you threw away." Gasps erupted. Emily staggered back, her veil trembling. "What does she mean by that?" she demanded, turning to Marcus. He tried to speak, but the words tangled on his tongue. His groomsmen whispered under his breath, "Man, they're all looking at you. Do something." But Marcus had no moves left. Guests kept recording. Paparazzi lenses zoomed in. The flashes were relentless. Some guests whispered louder now, their voices impossible to ignore. "Remember back in Dallas? She paid his rent. Didn't she put him through school? I heard she was working 2 jobs while he sat around chasing dreams." Each memory, each rumor spilled into the open, dragging Marcus's past sacrifices, no, Aaliyah's sacrifices, back into the light. Emily's voice broke. "Marcus, tell me this is all lies. Tell me you didn't lie to me from the start." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, shaking her head. "You made me laugh at her. You made me think she was beneath us." Her voice rose, cutting through the air. "But the truth is, she carried you, didn't she? She's the reason you even stand here today." Marcus's shoulders slumped, his polished image cracking in front of the very people he had hoped to impress. He looked at Aaliyah, desperation burning in his eyes, but she never stopped smiling. She didn't need to shout. Her presence said it all. She was no longer the woman he tried to bury. She was the proof that every lie he told was collapsing around him. And as the crowd pressed closer, as the whispers turned into judgment, Marcus realized something he couldn't admit out loud. This wasn't his wedding anymore. The spotlight had shifted. The day belonged to Aaliyah, and deep down, he knew the worst was still to come. Because the real blow, the one that would make even the strongest man break, was just around the corner. The crowd buzzed, voices rising in disbelief, phones raised high, waiting for the next strike. Marcus tried to gather himself, but his words stumbled out messy. "Listen, y'all don't understand. She's twisting the story." His voice cracked, desperation leaking through. Nobody looked convinced. Not a single face softened. Aaliyah stopped halfway down the aisle, her children still at her side. She turned, eyes steady, voice calm but unshakable. "Marcus, you left me with more than bills. You left me with 3 lives you didn't even have the courage to know existed." Gasps tore through the garden. One guest whispered, loud enough for others to hear, "Pregnant? He left her while she was pregnant." Another murmured, "He walked out before those kids were even born." Phones caught every word, streams filling with comments, "He's finished. How could he do her like that? Those babies are his mirror." Emily's face went pale, her body trembling. She clutched her veil, her voice breaking into a scream. "You mean you knew? You knew she was carrying your kids and you left her?" Marcus lunged forward, panicked. No, I didn't know. Aaliyah, tell them I didn't know." Aaliyah held her children's hands tighter, her smile unwavering. "You knew enough. You knew I was pregnant, you just didn't care." Her words weren't shouted. They were spoken plain, the kind of truth that didn't need volume to shake a man to his core. Emily collapsed onto a chair, sobbing. Her bridesmaids swarmed around her, whispering frantically. Emily's father turned on Marcus, his voice thunderous. "You've disgraced my family, you've disgraced this day, and you've disgraced yourself." Marcus tried to steady his breathing, tried to hold on to the last scraps of his image. "Y'all gotta understand, things were complicated back then." But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. Every head was shaking, every whisper biting. Complicated? She carried him. She worked herself to the bone for him. And he walked away? One of the children looked up at Aaliyah, tugging her hand. His small voice carried louder than anyone expected. "Mommy, can we go now? We don't belong here." The words landed heavy, slicing through the wedding like thunder. The crowd fell silent again, eyes darting back to Marcus, waiting to see if he would answer his own son. But Marcus had no answer. He stood frozen, his face pale, lips parted with nothing to give. His bride wept. His in-laws glared. His guests shook their heads in shame. Everything he had built, every lie he had crafted, had collapsed in one afternoon. His plan to disgrace Aaliyah had backfired so completely, he was the one drowning in humiliation. And then? Aaliyah turned to the crowd, her children at her side, her voice soft but commanding. "I didn't come here to fight. I didn't come here to ruin anything. I came here to show you that when someone tries to bury you, you don't just survive, you rise." The words struck deep. Guests lowered their phones, some nodding, some even tearing up. And in that moment, Aaliyah owned the day, not with anger, but with grace. The woman Marcus had thrown away stood glowing before everyone, and the crowd couldn't deny it any longer. Marcus's humiliation was complete. He had set the stage for her downfall, but instead, she delivered his. And yet, as heavy as the air felt, the story wasn't finished, because what Aaliyah did next made the entire crowd rise to their feet in applause. Aaliyah didn't scream. She didn't argue. She simply tightened her grip on her children's hands and began walking down that red carpet, her head held high, her golden gown sweeping behind her like it belonged there. Each step was measured regal, as though she had been born to walk this very aisle. The children walked proudly beside her, their little shoulders squared, their faces lit with pride. To the crowd, it looked less like a wedding procession and more like a queen entering her coronation. And then it happened. The silence broke. A single clap, sharp and defiant, echoed from the back row. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the garden filled with applause, cheers rising from every corner. Some guests stood, some whistled, some even shouted, "That's strength. That's real grace right there." The energy shifted. The crowd wasn't celebrating Marcus and Emily anymore. They were celebrating Aaliyah. Emily's mother leaned toward her daughter, her voice trembling with disgust. "We are leaving the circus. This man has disgraced you." She pulled Emily close, her father wrapping a protective arm around her as they guided her out of the spotlight. The bride's tears streaked her face, her veil crumpled, her perfect day in ruins. Marcus stood abandoned, sweat pouring, his face ashen. He tried to reach out toward the guests, his voice desperate. "Y'all don't understand. This isn't the whole story." But nobody listened. Their applause drowned him out. Their cheers swallowed his excuses. For the first time in his life, Marcus was invisible in a crowd he had fought so hard to impress. Aaliyah never broke stride. She reached the reception area, her children at her side, paparazzi flashes bouncing around her like fireworks. But her expression wasn't bitter, and her words weren't sharp. She spoke softly, just enough for the people closest to hear. "We didn't come here for revenge. We came here to show that no matter how hard someone tries to bury you, you rise. You rise for yourself. You rise for your children." Her triplets beamed up at her, their small hands clinging to hers. One whispered, his voice carrying just enough for those nearest to hear, "Mommy, you're our hero." The crowd melted, some wiping tears, others nodding with respect. The applause grew louder, more sincere. For the first time all day, the children weren't seen as Marcus's hidden shame. They were seen as heirs, as proof of resilience, as symbols of survival. Marcus collapsed into a chair, his tie undone, his face pale. He buried his head in his hands as the cheers for Aaliyah rang in his ears. This was supposed to be his show, his victory lap. Instead, it had turned into his undoing. And the more she shined, the smaller he seemed. Aaliyah guided her children through the reception, her presence commanding, her dignity unshaken. She didn't need to raise her voice or call attention. Every step spoke louder than Marcus ever could. The cameras followed her, the crowd praised her, and even those who came to laugh at her now bowed their heads in respect. And yet, she wasn't finished. Because before she left, before she turned her back on the chaos Marcus had created, Aaliyah gave him one last gift, one he would never forget. The applause began to die down, the crowd still buzzing, phones still raised, cameras still flashing. And in the middle of all that noise, Aaliyah did something no one expected. She let go of her children's hands for just a moment and walked toward Marcus. He was slouched in his chair, his tie hanging loose, his palms pressed against his face like he could hide from the truth. But there was no hiding. Not anymore. The garden had seen everything. The world had seen everything. A hush followed her footsteps. Guests leaned forward, waiting to see what she would do. Some whispered, "Is she really going to speak to him?" Others lifted their phones higher, desperate to capture the moment. Even Emily, crushed in her father's arms, lifted her tear-streaked face to watch. Aaliyah stopped right in front of him. For a second, Marcus didn't move. Then he looked up, his eyes red, his voice trembling. "Why'd you do this?" he muttered, his words barely holding. "Why here? Why now?" Her smile never wavered. She leaned just close enough for him to hear, her voice soft, steady, cutting deeper than any shout could. "Marcus, you tried to shame me, but I turned your stage into my crown." He froze, his mouth opened, but no words came out. The crowd around them stirred, murmurs racing. Some gasped, some nodded, some whispered, "That's power. That's grace." Aaliyah straightened, turned away without another word, and reached again for her children's hands. Together they walked down the aisle as if they owned it. Her golden gown caught the last of the light, her children smiling with pride, the red carpet now her throne. And the garden erupted again. This time not in whispers, but in thunderous applause. Behind her, Emily collapsed fully into her mother's arms, her sobs breaking through the cheers. Guests shook their heads, some muttering in pity, others in disgust. Phones captured every second. The bride's tears, the ex-wife's triumph, the groom's ruin. Marcus sat frozen, staring into emptiness. The man who thought he had it all, the man who believed he could rewrite his past, now had nothing. His bride was broken, his guests ashamed, his lies uncovered, his image destroyed. And as Aaliyah disappeared into the reception with her children, his silence was louder than any confession could ever be. In that single moment, Marcus lost everything. And Aaliyah, without revenge, without rage, walked away with the only crown that mattered, her dignity. Marcus wanted to disgrace her, but instead he disgraced himself. And Aaliyah? She rose higher than ever, walking away with her dignity, her children, and the respect of everyone who witnessed the truth. But let me ask you something. If someone stood by you at your lowest, would you abandon them the moment you rose to the top? Think about that. Because betrayal doesn't just destroy the person you left behind, it destroys you. And loyalty? Loyalty can crown the very people the world once counted out. Don't just click away and forget this moment. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you would have done if you were in Aaliyah's shoes. And subscribe right now, because these stories remind us of the cost of betrayal and the unstoppable power of truth.